Hi, Chris. How are you?
Joe, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. Yeah, I think we had some technical difficulties the first time we recorded, so here we are again. Maybe we'll be able to remember the conversation, but it was a great one. I was a bit bummed that I got cut off, but here we are again. It's good to see you again.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Happy to talk
Yeah.
data ops and hopefully I'll be more positive this time and won't be so depressingly negative about the state of our data and analytic teams.
Oh dear, I bring out the best in people, I swear. Awesome. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
So my name's Chris. I run a company in Massachusetts called Data Kitchen. And so we've been in business about 10 years, a profitable business, and we've really focused on what we think is the number one problem in data and analytic teams, which is waste. And so we think the waste comes from a lot of different things. We think it comes from building things that customers don't need. We think it comes from taking too much time to respond to errors. We think it's sort of not being able to refactor what you've already built. And so the idea is to get rid of that waste. We sort of stole from um, lean manufacturing and Deming, and we also stole them from Agile software and DevOps. And we wrote some books on data ops. We have some software that does it. And recently we released a whole bunch of open source software that I'd like to talk about.
That's so cool.
But mainly that's our goal is to eliminate waste and the other side of the waste, which is, the sort of pain and suffering of data engineers and data analysts.
Yeah, you're doing the Lord's work. I have a background in lean myself, so when you mentioned reduction of waste, my a piece of my heart lights up. It's great.
Oh, I'm
In fact,
happy that's good. Yeah.
I have let me see, Deming out of the crisis, understanding variation, Toad away. I don't even know how many Six Sigma books I have sitting on my shelf there, but yeah, quite a
Yeah,
few.
yeah. And it's kind of a shock, right, when you read it for the first time. Like I read it, I've been a software guy for about 15 years and worked at companies like Microsoft and NASA and MIT, and I'd managed teams. And then I sort of went to data and analytic teams and it wasn't great. And it wasn't
Yeah,
great. And I actually, as a leader, really responded badly. I probably fired people who I shouldn't because in Deming's term, I thought there were specific causes. I thought they were the problem. And it turns out, as a leader, that if you read Deming, 95% plus of the problems are process causes, not
yeah.
specific causes. And so I guess I'm ashamed to say, and hopefully no one's I fired back in those days is listening. But like when things go wrong and you can't do what you want, one of your first reactions as a manager is to assign blame. And I think that's not the best thing for teams, right? Especially because if you look at it as a technical process like manufacturing or like software development, which I do, um, you really have to fix the process before you can actually really start to assign blame on people.
Yeah, and it's such a good insight, and I think it's a rare one, especially in the technology field in general. I know that there's people are starting to do like blameless postmortems and pre-mortems even and stuff like that, which I think is good. Sort of anticipate the problems and blamelessly try and solve the problem. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think in the data industry, there's no shortage of broken processes, which we can get into. One thing I'm really curious about, so in Lean, there's the 8 forms of waste. Um, what do you think that those 8 forms of waste apply kind of one to one? Do they map one to one to the data world, or are there maybe variations or
I think
tweaks on
like
that?
with everything, there's sort of variations because the way I think of it is that I think of your production line in data and analytics as production, as you're taking data, transforming it, integrating it, visualizing it, modeling it, distributing it, right? That's your manufacturing line. Um, but that manufacturing line is not physical. So we seldom have bottlenecks in the manufacturing line of data. I mean, sometimes, but like just add a CPU. And so it doesn't really, that sort of theory of constraints, bottlenecks applies in a different way because
Yeah.
there's another process that I think is perpendicular to it, which is the deployment process. And if you look at the application of lean techniques to software, they focus a lot on the deployment process. And I think both those matter, right? And sort of the DevOps idea of bottlenecks are often in deployment in data and analytics and not in production. And so you have to talk about which one of these perpendicular processes
Mm,
you have to focus on. And so, I just think waste is, really comes from building things people don't want, right? That's because
yeah.
you've spent a long time doing it. It really comes from not being able to change something once you have it in production, not being able to tweak and improve. Another thing happens really when you've relying on your customers to QA your process, and they go, "This looks weird," and you're off trying to, have a war room and fix it. And all those things are just it just sort of eats at your soul, right? And a lot of data people are unhappy. Like we did a survey of 700 data engineers, and 78% wanted a therapist. And, I
Wow.
think 78%, and like over 50% wanted to quit. This was 2 years ago. It was actually it wasn't a bogus survey. We had an organization do it. It was 700 data engineers. And so, I had like so on my, Joe, I'm going to age myself, but like on my 42nd birthday, 18 years ago, I had a data engineer sit at my desk, and it was his 24th birthday
Wow.
during our one-on-one. And he started to cry. And he was like a smart guy. He like went to Brown, really good guy. But he was like, "Chris, I can't succeed. Things keep breaking all the time." And my boss, who was at the time was the CEO of the company, I was the COO, was kind of a dick. And he was pressing him to do more and more and more. And so he's like caught, like, I can't go fast enough. Things are breaking. I really want to succeed. And like, it just stuck with me that like, here's a smart guy, a good person. And like, I'm not going to blame him for things go wrong. And like, how do that's an extreme case, right? Of
Sure.
the emotional response to the stress. I mean, other cases are people they just get to be Dr. No, right? They just they're trying to find ways not to do things. Um, and actually, I saw that early in my career at the FAA. I was at a research project to automate air traffic control, and there were hundreds of people at the FAA who were trying to stop us. It was this NASA project to kind of seek automate the sequencing and spacing of aircraft, and I got frustrated with the no's there. And so, like, do you want your team to be depressed and angry? Do you want your team to be full of Dr. No's? Do you want your team to work so hard that they get burnt out and they quit? These failure modes are really symptoms of the greater waste problem in data and analytics.
So you mentioned a major form of waste is building stuff that people don't want. This happens often. Uh, In your experience, what do you think that the root cause generally is of building stuff that people don't want?
Not interacting with people. I mean, we've all got these weird talents, right? We'd much rather not talk to people. And so really what it means is your instincts are to go into your cave and code for a month or two and then pop out. And I've learned to be humble about what I know and what I think customers want. And I think trying to get it right is really hard. And any
Yeah.
intermediary form of getting it right, requirements, canvas, documentation, is people just need to touch it and see it in some ways. And so getting something 70% right, getting it in the hands of your customer, and then iterating and improving it is so much better. And you save so much time. And that also goes for like what sort of where things are in the stack. We
Mm,
have like questions in data and analytics about the degree of generality. Like you're into data modeling, right? And so having a good data model is great. But like, let's say you want to put a customer segmentation somewhere.
yeah.
It probably should be an attribute of a dimension. That might be the best way to do it. Or it could be in some view of the table, or it could be in an Alteryx job that runs it, or it could be in a Tableau workbook, right? You could literally have the segmentation and technically reside in various points in your data journey. And kind of where that is, I'm a big believer that you should try to do it as fast as possible and then have it earn its right to be more down in the stack and more automated, more tested, more structural.
Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes it's good to do things that are at the bottom of the stack first, get the schema right, and then work out like anything, these rules are but in order to get waste out, we have to not treat everything as has to be the maximum generality, right? There's some things that are in
Yeah.
data and analytics you just want to throw away.
Oh, yeah, I think a big chunk of it too. Or there's things that you just can't get rid of no matter how hard you try, and you're just sort of stuck with it. I mean, that's the reality in a lot of companies too, is you inherit some sort of a system no matter what it is, and I think the cost of ripping it out, replacing it, whether that's data model, the system itself, some component of it. I mean, it might cost too much to do it, both in terms of money and just mental bandwidth to
Yeah,
put into it, right? Like I saw one company where they had like thousands of SSIS jobs. Nobody knew what they did, but it's sort of like defusing a bomb where you're not quite sure where the thousand wires go. Like, might be better to like just move it to
just
somewhere and let
just
it
just
explode.
hope. Yeah,
Yeah.
you like live in hope that it's not going to break. And yeah, how do you get a couple thousand SSIS jobs? And I mean, people are doing that
Yeah.
exactly today and replace SSIS with whatever cool tool you want to do. They're creating technical debt,
Yeah.
right? And how do you make something so you can give it to a 23-year-old and they
Yeah.
can fix it and change it? Because your job as someone who's not 23 is to find a way to do work that you can transfer to someone else so you can keep creating new things. And often what happens are people on the other side, they're saying, I'm awesome, look at all the stuff I do, but they're creating massive amounts of technical debt and they can't. And then it builds and builds. They get this hairball of 2,000 SSIS jobs. And then what do you do with that? Well, lo and behold, they listen to the recruiter, they get 10 more thousand years, they get to leave, and all that intellectual property disappears in the company. And like you're stuck, right? As I look at it from my manager position, you're just screwed, right? And you can beg that person and throw money at them. But what happens with teams is there's a whole bunch of invisible stuff that needs to be made
Yeah.
visible. And and to me, the idea of data ops is making what's invisible visible to people,
Mm,
and
that's a good
making
insight.
that on the stage for people to prioritize and talk about and work on.
What are some of those things that are invisible that should be visible?
Um, well, I mean, at the basic is the code that acts upon your data, right? That should be in Git. But the code that acts upon your data should be tested, right? You should have in the development process, you should have unit, functional, regression tests, impact analysis tests based on good data, based on a representative sample of your data, if not all the data. So then
Mm,
you could talk about another 23-year-old. So you hire a 23-year-old in your team, they change the misspelling in a schema, right? And like just a misspelling in a schema, they should be able to do that their first day. And you should be able to get something in production that day or that week,
yep.
right? So how do you arm a 23-year-old to be able to say, I changed something, I don't understand anything about it. I've got my CS degree. I don't understand that this table connects to this table that's running this report, that's this model. I don't understand all the things that relate to it, but I want a big red or green light saying I fixed the spelling. Here's all the stuff downstream that breaks. So it's really having a development process that maximizes the ability of people who don't know the system to make small changes and get into production with very, very low risk. So that's one thing. And then the second part is um, really being able to have another 23-year-old problem, which is you have someone who's watching your system on Saturday and something goes wrong, they can find out where it is, right, in the system,
Yeah.
and maybe they can fix it, right? Um, and so, and then the last problem is like the 46-year-old problem, which is how can the manager measure how many errors you have, your cycle time, your productivity, even are your customers happy with it? There's like a measurement problem. And so the two 23-year-olds and 46 problem, I think, are really key to making these things visible because reports become visible because the process that you work in, having a big red or green light next to it saying, hey, your deployment's failing or your production broke before it got to your customer, that's like a visible thing. And then you can start to The last thing is really a management visibility, which is saying, I've got to do things. I've got to take those SSIS jobs and one by one, I've got to pull them off and either document them or redo them, right? So someone can understand it. I've got to wrap them in tests. I got to wrap them in deployment, and you've got to say, I've got technical debt and process debt that I've got to work down
Yep.
and prioritize that with other things. And so it's just, I Joe, I look at it from a manager perspective because I'm old and but like even from an individual contributor perspective, you can do the same thing, right? You can make all those things um, visible. And software engineers are really good at that, and data engineers honestly suck at it.
Yeah.
Most data engineers just sort of take it on the chin.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think part of that is, at least from my perspective, I see it as a couple of things. One of it's a training and knowledge problem. It feels like just the notion of ops is still it's still, I think, entering into the consciousness of the data world, but it's not quite there yet, which we can probably expand on.
Yeah,
Also, the software engineers, yeah, they just had a lot more. I think there's just been a lot more rigor that's been, I guess, instilled in most software engineers in terms of operations and deployment and stuff. This ties back to the first point. But also the feedback loop is a lot tighter, typically with, and this goes back to lean, where you have sort of a continual workflow, right? And so you get a feedback loop of issues a lot more quickly. Say an application, right? You release a feature, your CI/CD pipeline catches something, whatever. But whereas in data, you have two issues. One is that data is typically lobbed over the wall at you, which is one of the forms of waste of batch. And then the other part of it is um, the feedback loop between you releasing a report and getting feedback on that. Like you point out, your users are typically your testers as well, which really sucks. So you normally don't know until somebody complains and says, "Oh, the data's wrong." And then that
yeah,
that actually like torpedoes you in a couple other ways because one, you got technical debt, you got data debt, but then you have organizational debt, which I look at as sort of a punch pass of like you get 30 punches, call it 20, whatever, 10. 10 screw ups you can make with the organization before your data team is effectively irrelevant and dissolved.
yeah.
Right. And
And
so
if
this
you're the leader,
happens.
you're looking for a job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You can only beg for it. I mean, when back in 2006, I would sit in my car in the morning, not look at my BlackBerry because I had a long drive, and then I'd sit in the parking lot and then pull up the BlackBerry and wait for the crap that went wrong because I
Oh,
just didn't want to
Jesus.
like worry about it the whole thing because
That's such a
I was just
grim
like it's the morning
image.
dread.
That's such a
Yeah,
that's like
but
something out of like Office Space or something.
I know, but it probably would have been better if I would have looked at it before because I could have, but anyway.
Was this sort of like
Um,
is this sort of when you started realizing that data ops, which it wasn't called that back then, but was this sort of when you started realizing that maybe there's a different way to do things?
I'm a software guy, so I knew about DevOps and Agile, right?
Yeah.
But we really weren't having problems deployment. We were having problems running things because our data
Oh,
providers
interesting.
were really crappy. So it
Hmm.
was so it actually dawned on me that it was a manufacturing line. And then I started to look at, read The Machine That Changed the World in college, and that sort of
That's a great
and
book.
then yeah, and then there's another one called The Goal, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on that. And so um I really started to think of it as a manufacturing process. And
Yep.
then I said, well, what's the first thing you should do? I had a quality circle, and we just wrote down every problem we had in a spreadsheet. And then every 2 weeks, we'd automate, test, fix. We do something in code to make sure it never happened again. And that actually was one of the bright spots of my management career, which is like just taking a team that was so beaten down and giving them a chance to love their errors. And instead of taking the blame and shame culture, saying, look, it's an opportunity for us. This is an opportunity, it's an opportunity for improvement. And I started to like write these mantras down, opportunity for improvement, no blame and shame, love your errors, and started to repeat them over and over again. And the culture started to change because people were started, as engineers do, they started to mock me. But like, I think it's really true. It's like culture matters, and having a boss who is not going to scream and yell at you or threaten to fire you when something goes wrong, and says, "Hey, look, let's learn from this,
Yeah.
and do better." That really, it really changes the culture on it. And so I think, leadership matters, but also I think I saw agile and software development come from individual contributors. There was an architect
Interesting.
and a senior developer who said, "This is insane what we're doing. We got to do sprints. We got to," this was back in the early 2000s. And so, um, I've been trying to push this change because I believe in it and I've suffered it and I keep seeing it over and over again. Um, and I hear you say God's work, and it makes me frustrated because it's a nice thing, but like, why do you suppose people aren't doing this more? Like, what am I just? I wake up in the middle of the night and go, I must be crazy. What am I doing? Is it like, am I wrong? Is this not the thing? Is data too different? Is it just going to take time? What do you think?
I've been thinking a lot about this as I've been working on my book on data modeling. I'm actually in the chapter where we're discussing sort of what I describe as the five W's of data modeling, taking after the five W's of journalism, really. And it starts with who and why, actually. So unless you know who this data model is serving and why it's being built and why it's needed, I think that all too often it's easy to skip to the tactics of what are we trying to model and so forth. But I think these
Yeah,
first two, the who and the why, is a central thing where I think um, if you can get empathy from people, from stakeholders, and vice versa, have empathy for them and what they need, then I feel like a lot of things fall into place. That also sort of answers your why almost automatically. Um, but at the same time, the God's work comment is interesting because I feel like no matter, you can write books, I can write books, you can write a manifesto, I can write a manifesto, and some people will read it and I think really latch onto it. Um, but it sort of reminds me of what happened with the Agile Manifesto to some degree. That became a victim of its own success. I would say that it's a positive case where like Agile took off, but I think not in the ways that the I guess the authors of the manifesto really intended. It became sort of the Agile industrial complex, uh,
yeah,
and so the God's work thing is interesting because I feel like on one hand, I think people have good intentions, but take the best case scenario where it is agile. It takes off and then people co-opt it so they can make a shit ton of money off of it. Um, and
or
I
that,
think that
or they co-opted it for their own organizational needs,
exactly,
right? It
yeah,
becomes,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
because
But
of
then
power and management.
the issues I've seen with agile inevitably run into the organizational inertia that's inherent to every organization, and the bigger the company typically, and I say the more mature or legacy the company, I think the harder it is. Like the best time I think to adopt these practices is when you're getting started as a company or when you're young and you have the flexibility. By the time you're
Yeah,
ossified, it's very difficult to do this stuff. One of my friends, she was telling me about a company where she took over as head of data, and there was a team of um, you know, um, uh, MDM folks, master data management people there. And what she realized, they were literally just running a copy and paste operation for like the last 20 plus years. There was no real work being done. Um,
yeah,
but, so you tell me how something like ops is going to work in a situation like that, where, I mean, everything they're doing is antithetical to that notion because they have job security. They don't need to do anything and nobody's looking over their
yeah,
shoulder. So it's like, but that's as in my consulting practice, I've dealt with like hundreds of companies at this point. And it's like, I think over and over, the thing I've seen is like, it's, it's, it's the entrenchment of the existing patterns that really, I think more than anything, either allows or inhibits adoption of any new patterns. But ops is still
yeah,
such a foreign idea to data people in that sense, where it gets even harder because then you're like, well, what do you mean we don't do unmonitored ETL? Like that's how we've always done it. We find out about errors when people scream about it. Um, but yeah, you're right. Does it have to be that way? Certainly not. I mean, I think we share the same vision where hopefully that world changes and goes away over the next decade. But
yeah. I
it's
wonder too if you go back 15, 20 years ago, people who did data, we used to call them ETL engineers, not data.
yeah,
Like no one had a degree in it. like I had music majors. No one had a CS degree. People fell into data,
Yep.
right? And then it was let's outsource it all to India because data is furniture. It's not a value creator, right? It's like let's
Hmm.
have, and so yeah, you could have a nice chair, but it's not going to make your business any better, right? And uh, then I think what happened was Moneyball data. The last 10 years have been this amazing push on people trying to be data driven, right?
Yep.
And then the investment bubble and zero interest rates and all this stuff and all these great tools came out. And so I think like I'm really happy when people use the term data engineer, that there's books and courses on it. I think it's also data engineers are still on the I'm a lunch pail guy. My job is to get beaten
Yep.
down, as opposed to software engineers who are a little bit of a swagger and like, I've got the keys to the new kingdom. But the
Yep.
reality is data engineers have the keys to the new kingdom just as much as software engineers. And so I guess I'm hoping that data engineers have some swagger and say, look, I don't want to live this way. We're
Yeah.
not going to have unmonitored ETL. We're not going to have hope for deployment. If there's three people doing manual stuff, let's take their budget and automate it. And therefore, let's, they can do something that's more valuable for the organization. And so I
Absolutely.
think, um, to me, that's sort of why we try to do data ops from the top down with sort of senior leaders and chief data officers. And their life cycles like 18 months, 2 years, and then they're gone. And
Yep.
they inherit, they come in with a whole bunch of big ideas. They see the mess that they're in, and then they just can't fix it, and then they're gone.
That
And
happens all
so
the time. All the
yeah,
time.
yeah, it's a really tough position because of that.
Oh yeah.
And then there's all this buzzwords of we're going to do AI now, which probably makes it even harder for them,
Well, now they're all
right? They've
chief
been,
AI officers. That's what the chief data officers become the chief AI officer. That's the new rebranding of it.
yeah,
They're going to run into exactly the same problems, and everyone knows it. I mean, I was at a chief data officer summit in Boston last December, and I honestly felt like I was in an AA meeting. Um, like it just everyone is like commiserating, talking about one, the short tenure of that position, and two, this the challenges of that job. You spend half your time, okay, say you got 18 months, right? Average tenure, 2 years, call it, optimistically, but okay, so you spend half your time in alignment meetings trying to align with everybody. And the thing is, because a lot of other people own data, you come in and now you're kind of a threat to them, actually. You're the chief data officer, and you're going to take the data that I've been stewarding in my kingdom. Um, it's not a situation. I would never want that job, ever. There's no way in hell you could hire me for
yeah.
that
I mean,
job.
it depends on who you are, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you read The Goal, you read The Phoenix Project, right?
Mhm.
Companies are broken, and
Yeah.
so they need to be fixed, right? And so what I don't see is the core root problem. I think to
Correct.
them,
Yeah.
they need
Yeah.
to work on their people and process.
That's just
That's where
it.
they need to
That's
they need
just
to come
it.
in and say, and forget all these freaking IT buzzwords and data mesh, data products. They're all great terms, but really start working on the core of how you manage your team, run your team, work on the people and process, make it more iterative, make it more automated.
Spot on.
And it's work on the manufacturing line. That's where the value is created,
Oh yeah.
not in designing a. It's just like Detroit back in the 80s, like when like I grew up in Wisconsin, there were crappy cars, like the Pacer was a crappy car. And I remember reading articles about AMC's gonna introduce robots, it's gonna make it all better. It didn't. They went out of business. Robots, AI aren't gonna make it better.
Right.
It's
No,
it's
it's
you gotta do the work.
well, yeah, and I think it's a tale of two worlds too. Like I wrote about this in a blog post last month where it was sort of, comparing what the two types of data teams really. One works in enterprise land, which is sort of the world we're discussing, which is, you know, um, just old ossified companies that maybe are attempting to digitally transform, but that's been something they've been doing
Yeah.
for past 20, 30 years. Then you have, sort of the product land is the other one. And there, data is it's essential to the product, right? If you think of an app like TikTok, for example, it's like data and the algorithm and continual inference and stuff like that is the product. Like there's literally no
Yeah.
separation between the data and the product. So I think, for data, and I've been thinking about this a lot. I think, maybe I don't know what you think about this, but if I were trying to spearhead something like data ops, for example, I'd be focusing on those types of organizations where that's going to be a necessity to them, where that's just part and parcel of this. That they already know CI/CD for engineering, data, same thing. It's just a lot easier to shoehorn it in versus trying to go to a lot of these just frankly a lot of these companies that there's so much friction. Um, I mean,
Yeah,
because as you point out, you're not just talking about technological transformation at a deeper level. It is truly, and I'm glad you pointed this out. It is absolutely a cultural, uh, people thing that needs to be fixed. No amount of lipstick on pig is going to help the situation. It won't.
yeah, yeah. And it's a better way to work. Your people are happier. And I've seen organizations who are extremely agile in their software development and completely unagile and ossified and slow in their data world in the same company.
That's
It's
crazy.
insane. And then I've seen the opposite. I've seen there's been some agile teams in ossified old companies. Like I did this consulting project with a large tobacco manufacturer, and they were the coolest, nicest team in Malaysia, and they were incredibly agile. Of course,
That's
they
super
produced
cool.
cancer in a stick, but I mean, they were good. So, but like I think it is weird, but in general, I think you're right because I also think teams themselves fall on the fear and heroism axis, right? They have the fear
Yeah,
teams that are slow and ossified. I don't want to blow it up. I don't want to get yelled at. We have what works. No, no, no. And then you have the hero teams. They're working nights and weekends. They're really trying to focus on what the customer does. They're creating 5,000 DBT models and 10,000 reports, and they're go, 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 and then things are blowing up on them, and then it gets caught up. But I mean, for a while, being a hero is great, right? It's if you own your own world and you know everything, and if you're 25, 26, that's cool. Like who doesn't want to be a hero? But
right.
it's a balance, right, between those opposites. That's where you need to be. Have a little bit of fear, a little bit of heroism, but work on your team and your process.
What do you think about the idea of data, say data engineers working more closely with software engineers? Do you think that would instill more of an operations mentality?
Yes, because I want them to have the software engineering attitude to go, ooh, like if you go and interview a software engineer and you say, well, our deployment takes 3 hours. They'll go, ooh, like literally, I've interviewed people who will say to me to my face, ooh, our deployment's 3 hours, not 3 minutes. And so I think that's good, right? That they're so concerned about their work environment that they're asking about it to make sure that they want to work in a way where they can maximize their output, maximize
Mhm.
their customer impact. And I think data engineers should be like that. And I've seen more and more software engineers go into the data field, and they're just sort of shocked. They're like, "What? You don't do this?" And
Yes.
they sort of start believing that data is different, and data is not different. It's just another software driven batch process. That's all it is, or a real time process. It's just software defined. You have a couple more tools. You have to have more spike solutions, but it's software principles apply, manufacturing principles apply, and so it would help. But I guess really on. I'm really trying. Our company's really trying to focus on individual contributors because we got so caught up in talking to the CDOs and thinking
Mm.
because I went to the DevOps Enterprise Summit 6 years ago, and I saw all these enterprise teams talking about DevOps transformation and really joyful and happy. I'm like, that's going to happen in data. There's a lot of money in these big companies. You know, let's go and help them. And the 2 year tenure of CDOs and the unending stream of Gartner buzzwords has gotten in the way. So I'm on like, let's individual contributor. You're going to make it happen because your bosses are never going to do it. If you're going to not want to have your job come with a therapist, you're going to have to fix it yourself.
That kind of leads into the open source stuff you've been working on. You want to talk about that?
Hmm. Yeah. So, we spent a lot of years building two open source products that solve two specific problems. One is that data engineers don't quite know how to test things. And
Right.
so they don't know how to test data. Maybe because they don't have business context, maybe because they don't have time, but writing data quality validation tests. And there's a guy on my team, Chip, who has championed this for the past 4 years, and he's him and a few other people have built this tool that scans data, uses some cool algorithmic techniques, and builds a whole set of data quality validation tests for you,
That's
and
cool.
then puts it in a nice UI for you to manage. And that way, it takes the burden of having to write those tests off of you. And so, and they're a whole thing, anomaly detection, they're single table, multi-table. It's pretty cool. And then the second thing is the other challenge is how do you monitor your manufacturing line?
Mm,
You know, if you've got all these tools and you know the modern data stack, you've seen the architecture diagrams, the little boxes everywhere diagram, right? Where there's I got DBT, I got Airflow, I got SSIS, I got this, I got that. And how do you, if you want to find problems before your customer sees it, you need something that sits on top of all those little boxes monitoring production. And so you can find the problem hopefully before it gets to your customer. And so we have another sort of software that is API driven that invented this sort of concept of a data journey. That is sort of think of it as like the digital twin of your data and analytic production process. And so both those concepts, I don't really think. I think there are some companies doing automatic test generation now. Um, Not very many, and there's not really an equivalent of the data journey. And we decided to open
right.
source them just because they're Apache 2.0, they're complete. They're complete for one user. If you want your whole team on them, you got to buy the enterprise pers. You know,
Sure.
we're capitalists. Um, but we're excited about it. It's only been a month or two since we brought it out, but that's sort of why I'd like people to give it a try, see if it works for them. And those are the two particular problems. You don't have time to write tests. Well, good. You want to monitor production. Well, you need something to sit on top of it and monitor it.
That's super cool. Is this on GitHub?
Yep, it's on GitHub.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Cool. I'll put a link to that in the show notes
So we
here.
spent some time in the installer. We did a 7-hour certification series on data quality and data observability. That's actually surprisingly popular. We've already had like 300 people sign, no, 400 people sign up. It's crazy. And so there's a lot of thirst, I think, out there for how to do this. And we, you know, we're of course we're a business, but we aren't encumbered with trying to grow at some rapid rate because we're profitable and independent and we're owned by, you know, the founders and other people and our employees. And so, you know, we're sort of in it for, you know, I'm 60, right? This is the end of my career. And like, I want to make a difference. Like, it
That's
bugs me
cool.
that this is still going on. It bugs me that data teams are still suffering. And like, I'd like to, the reason I get up in the morning is I want to fix it, right? I want teams to change. And I think because and you'll have an unhappy life if you keep working the way you're working.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's super cool. Walk me through this too. I mean, so you've run a successfully bootstrapped profitable company. Congratulations on that. That's awesome. Um, in a field where, especially in 2020, 2021, I think a lot of companies started in the data ops space. Maybe there were a few before that, but I think definitely started noticing that, well funded by VCs and so forth. Um, what was it like, I guess, seeing basically this, I don't know if a tidal wave, but, uh, a wave of a bunch of companies in the space all of a sudden, in a space that you were, running a, sort of
You know,
the anti-VC
first of
company
all,
almost.
I think running a company is really hard. So whether it's VC or bootstrapped or profitable, it's hard. So,
Hmm.
and they're making their amount of VC money is making so much marketing noise. And they're at so many conferences that they're pushing the ball forward. And so I think
Yeah,
good for them, right?
yeah,
And it's an ocean, right? There's room enough for lots of fish.
yeah.
Um, from a personal standpoint, in those times, I did have friends who were saying, do what everyone else does, get some funding, take some secondary, put it in the bank, put it in your own pocket. we didn't do that, and I'm glad we didn't, because it's pretty hellacious now for a lot of companies, because their valuations go down. And I've been in startups for a while, that getting too much funding too early and is a killer, right? Um, and so for us, our success is not measured by like we're going to be $1 billion company. It's success of how much we push the principles of DataOps forward.
That's what I meant by doing God's work. 'Cause it
Yeah,
seems like
it is, I guess,
it's a
I don't
different
know. I
motivation.
mean,
You're not in it to see if VC can get his third yacht. Um, so
yeah,
and
and
so you can
also
buy your first.
it's who you, yeah, it's who by the time you're my age, it's who you are. Like I'm not really good talking to VCs. I kind of find them annoying. And so I'm a working class kid from Wisconsin, and I don't want to talk to a 30-year-old who went to a prep school in Harvard. I
Right.
find those people incredibly annoying. And so I wish I could. Some people are really good at that. And also I don't believe I know the future. So like I can't say, if you give me $50 million, we're gonna grow this amount. I just don't. I don't have crystal balls. And so, however, on the other hand, there are plenty of successful companies that have been built from VCs. It's just
Yeah.
very rare, right? And like if you look at the number of IPOs of data companies, it's a couple in the last 10 years, right? It's rare that you take a company public. So it's a tough business.
Oh, it's a tough business, and
So
going
anyone
public
anyone
is
who's
hard.
pushing the balls uphill on data ops, or or data quality, or data observability, is doing God's work in my mind. And so I'm hoping we all can win.
Oh yeah, no, it's a big enough space, and I had a lot of friends in the observability space asked if I could advise their companies and stuff, but I was like, I know everybody who has a data observability company, and so I just kind of recused myself. I'm like, everyone's a friend, so I don't want to be seen like picking sides. I want everybody to win. And I was like, you all kind of do it. I think to your point, you all, yeah, all the companies do need each other to boost that space. 'Cause I think I was talking to actually it was Igor from Big Eye about this, where it's Snowflake, but he made an interesting comment where it felt like at Snowflake Summit, a couple years ago, last year, people were asking, what is data observability? Right. Where if you fast forward to today, people are like, okay, so there's teams in my company who are using, data observability products. How do I get started on this? Right. So I think
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. Like the conversation is more about adoption now versus educate me on this space. I have no idea what it is. So
yeah,
that's cool to see.
yeah. And I think, I was I've been at conferences and had that same thing where people absolutely don't know what. That's what where I wrote the Data Ops Manifesto. Is like I
Right.
came back from a conference, and no one knew what I was talking about. And I kept trying. I spent 2 days saying the same thing in different ways. And finally, I had one guy who was a software engineer come up to me saying, "Are you just talking about DevOps for data?" And I go, "Yes." And he goes, "Why don't you just call it that?" And I go, "Well, because nobody in the data field understands what DevOps is." And I think, yeah, I think it's good. And I think we're all kind of like, your role with your book, and my role with my sort of trying to talk about things. We're kind of viruses that are trying to spread ideas, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's really good about the data field is it is full of people who are really interested in ideas and really sort of want to change things. And
Oh
so
yeah.
it's just, if you look at what's happened in the last 5 or 10 years, it's amazing. And it's so much better than 15 years ago, right?
Oh,
We're
you
no
don't want to go
longer
back to that
teams of
world.
furniture movers.
No, you don't want to go back to that
Yeah.
world. That world sucked. Yeah, I was actually talking to a friend of mine in Finland today, and she mentioned I was like, oh, I'm going to talk with Chris in the podcast. She's like, oh, I love the Data Ops Manifesto. It's so cool. So it's cool. I mean, I think that's the power of writing and getting things out there is, you talk about idea viruses and so forth and virus spreaders, but I think like I know that that's the role I want to be in now. I actually don't want to do consulting very much unless it's for, something that I find interesting, just because you're solving a one-to-one problem. I don't know about you, but I'm interested in solving one-to-many problems at this point.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's how you impact the field, and I think that's how you're able to help a lot more people. I mean, just because there's the inherent friction of consulting is well, there's a lot of friction in every way, shape, or form. And half the time, you mentioned therapy. I mean, I feel like I'm playing therapist to data teams. I feel like I'm playing therapist to this, the decision maker who hired us in. Half the conversations are just, I guess along the lines of, am I being gaslit or is this stuff like as hard as it seems? I'm like, I think it's as hard as it seems. You're not
Yeah,
insane.
yeah. That's a very common manager question. Like, am I being gaslit? Because they're all, yeah. And sometimes they are, unfortunately. But like, yeah, I think from my standpoint, spreading, it's like I have a good friend and she's a therapist and she has a book
Mhm.
about childhood and emotional neglect. And it's done the same thing, the same idea of spreading ideas and teaching. And it's good. I think, what I do hope someday is that there's a university course that's required for people who are doing data science or data engineering. There's a data engineering course, just like there's a software engineering course where you learn to build things as a team, right?
That's
And,
cool.
and how you do that. And I think those principles are important. It's not, most people who come out with a software degree or a CS degree, they've only done one project like that. So they kind of know the terms. Um, but it's pretty shocking for most people when they come out of school and they suddenly are working with 5 or 10 or 15 people and how different it is, right? And how hard it is. And also just, I hope data and analytic teams get less balkanized, right? It's not like I've got the
Yeah.
ingest team, analytic engineer team, and they don't talk to each other and everyone's finger pointing. Like that's also just an anti-pattern, as far as I'm concerned.
It's an anti-pattern. It's a common pattern. It needs to go away for sure. It's interesting because you're going to make a cameo appearance in my upcoming Coursera course, and one of the things that um, I'm going to give a preview of what's in it, but part of the beginning of it's actually talking about requirements gathering and getting out and talking to the business and understanding what people want and building on
Yeah,
that. I think that's a good 2 weeks of the course actually is just being able to learn how to start seeing and thinking like a data engineer versus because the way I hated the way a lot of data engineering was taught where it's go learn Spark and here's how you spin up Spark. And I'm like, if you're hired as a junior data engineer, which is a person usually taking these types of courses, there's no way in hell anybody's going to help you go and spin up Spark. First of all, you're not stepping
yeah,
into a greenfield opportunity typically because that's not where juniors get hired.
yeah.
And so and like why do you waste your time teaching beginners this sort of thing? I understand maybe from a mechanics level, with Spark, but at the same time, like it doesn't really serve the learner, those kinds of things because it's just nothing you're gonna be doing in the real world.
Yeah, and like, well, you went through the Hadoop Spark, bullshit cycle, right? Where
Yep.
like most people have like mostly everyone's databases are what terabyte size, 5, 10, 50, 100 terabytes. You don't need a Hadoop or a Spark cluster for that, right? And so most people's data and analytic work is on what's relatively small data. And
Mhm.
so it drove me nuts when you go to everyone saying, well, we've got to do unstructured data or schema on read, or we're going to bring in the Twitter fire hose. And you're like, no, you've got 5 terabytes of data. Just put it in a database and copy and paste it around and like use that. And so I think there's also and I think it's also, I think because of the lack of job security of data engineers, they always want to keep up on the new buzzwords. And
Yeah.
so they want to be buzzword compliant because they feel, I think deep down that they're doing something wrong and that the things aren't right and that they're going to have to flip jobs again. And so they're trying to stay current. And that also makes it hard, right? Because how many companies are littered with you can date companies' tech infrastructure by like their stack.
Yeah, yeah,
You've got
yeah.
the 2000 stack, you've got the 2010 stack, you've got the 2020 stack, right? And it's like, okay, I've got DBT, Airflow, I've got, I've got Teradata and Informatica, and like you can date it. And so it's why are we so fashionable?
That's so funny. It reminds me of this trip I took last month to the Grand National Staircase outside of Escalante, where you can see sort of the geological formations of each
Yeah.
layer over hundreds of millions of years. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That definitely resembles tech stacks to data stacks to a large degree. Um, and the thing is, there's nothing wrong with the old stuff. I mean, it doesn't lend itself well to ops, but I think that's hopefully changing. I'm starting to see some more movement in that. Um, but yeah, I mean, it is, yeah,
I,
it's
yeah, I think people, I think it starts with what it starts with, I think, data engineers saying, I've had enough. I don't want to work somewhere for
yeah.
18 months and flip. I think it really starts with us just getting pissed and saying, we're valuable. You can't do data work without us. And so, um, and I think it's what's happened now, I think, is the tech stack's gotten more complicated with
Yeah.
DBT and SQL and cloud, that it is arguably not going to be simplified. And so, and that you can, you need really skilled technical professionals to run and build it.
Oh yeah, and it comes back to skills and competency too. I think, understanding the principles of DataOps, for example, and doing that as well, I think is super key. Data modeling is another one where I think that
Yeah.
if you understood the practice of data modeling, you wouldn't have to write. In this case, I was in a Slack conversation with somebody recently, and they had 4,000 DBT jobs for I think a relatively small data team. I was like, how the hell did
Yeah.
this happen? Um, and they're like, so I think they had each DBT job was pointed at a different size Snowflake size warehouse. To me, one's for extra small,
Wow.
one's for small. And I'm like, cool, it's combinatorially, you just exploded your workflow as well. This is absolutely bananas. And so and I don't know how they're gonna get out of that. It's a
Well,
pretty
they can't, right? And this is common. Like I've seen cases where they've had 1,000 chunks of SQL and 500 Cognos reports. So
oh my
when
God.
you're built, so this is the case where I talk about where does the logic lie and deciding where it is in the stack,
Yeah,
right? And so these tools that are more on the analyst side, they tend to have logic spew, where you're building a bunch of small tables to feed one report with a certain set of business logic. And that's fine, right? And like you should do that, but you should be able to say, look, I need to push this back farther in the stack. It is an attributed dimension, or we should have an aggregate table, or we should have a whole new set of facts and dimensions to handle this.
yeah,
And being able to refactor, as to me, it's not an aspect of the design of DBT or an aspect of these people. It's just that they're working hard, they're being heroes, and they don't have any way to make what's invisible visible, saying, look, we got to
yeah.
refactor this stuff. We can take 1,000 tables and put them in one. I mean, if you actually look at data modeling, most business problems can be handled by like 5 or 6 dimensions.
Yep, absolutely.
And like, and so you don't want to go back. Like 8 or 9 years ago, I was at a conference where a guy who was a professional data modeler was telling me Agile was full of shit. It'll never apply to data. You got to start from your data model and work out. And it takes months to build every data model. And so, like, to me, data models, and I'm sorry if I go off here, but like
No,
data
please
models
do.
are like software interfaces, right? They're interfaces. Good interfaces make good neighbors. And like you can spend too much time. Don't have the build it. Like I think you can do agile data modeling. In fact, I know I've done it for a decade.
Yeah, me
You
too.
can tweak and start with something. It's again, give it 70% right, learn and iterate from it. And
Yeah.
it's like where you're going to put the work in your tech stack.
Oh yeah, and I just heard about that this week actually about exactly what you're saying, where I think the days of, sort of the grand old enterprise data model that maybe was achievable in the 80s and 90s when you had more time to do that kind of stuff. That's a pipe dream, and I would say almost every company. You're not going to be afforded the opportunity to do that no matter how hard you try. So yeah, I mean, you could definitely take a data model first approach. I think you should, but it doesn't have to be exhaustive, right? I think if you did that, you're going to get fired.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, and honestly, a first one isn't that hard anyway. It's just like most companies have a couple of dimensions and facts, and like that's what you're going to put in your data model, and start with that, and then see how many of your 1,000 DBT tables you can replace.
that's
And
just it.
it's yeah, and it's like a nice it's a nice fun activity, and like there's people who are good at it, right? Because they're sort of think philosophically and conceptually, and there's people who are like really that they're great at it. And so I think it's a really important skill for people to have. And it's also um, we're in the complexity reduction business, not the complexity increase business, and we're in the a business of finding good general abstractions that can handle a lot of things.
Yeah.
And if you get those, um, you have a lot of power, and you can do a lot of things. And so when you see, like, I literally have seen teams of 400 people who I know 4 people can do it better. Like literally, and I've seen it, and and so there are hundreds of people who aren't really doing anything because they're going in meetings and sitting and they're evaluating and they're writing things and fixing things and they're building more DBT tables. And the power of generality is the power to take people out.
Yeah.
And taking people out is a good thing because that enables them to do something valuable, right? Because you've just saved the organization a ton of time. And so smaller, leaner, faster teams can get more done. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's when Gartner writes about data ops having a 10x productivity improvement. I believe it, because I've seen it and I've done it. And um, and I think that's the opportunity for people to have. And that's why, honestly, there's big companies, a lot of bigger tech companies, because their business they're so steeped in agile, they're fantastic. Like they're really good, they're really quick, and it's the software process, it's the data process, it's their how they do business. Everything is built on build a little, test a little, learn a lot,
Yeah.
right? And just and that's their mode of working. And so that's why we have some very, very competitive some of the largest companies in the US are just hyper competitive, which is like weird, right? You say big companies, well, there's a class of big companies who are insanely agile and insanely competitive and
Yeah.
build and throw stuff away at an amazing rate. And like, I don't know, no wonder. And everyone's kind of afraid of them, right? Like anybody who does anything in retail is like afraid Amazon's going to enter their business.
They will.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you could ship it, you could sell it. So let's do it. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
super cool.
So yeah, I think but I'm still excited about the future. I think I'm excited that there's a whole new class of people who've done DBT and done SQL and have some familiarity with Git. Like I've talked to people 10 years ago at a conference and no one knew what Git was. 100 people and no one knew what Git was. 100 data people. And now it's more common for people to start using version control, and people aren't shy about using SQL. Whereas before it was like, oh, SQL's bad. I need to have a visual UI to do it. And I don't really care how you do your tool, but the fact that you're putting in version control and is great. And so I think there's a whole class of tools that are like BI tools that are also sort of more code driven than
Right.
than UI driven. And of course, the whole Python ecosystem. So I think a lot of things are trending in the right direction from moving the concepts of, not only data observabilities with the other data ops companies, but also just the amount of code that people are writing and putting in Git. And, I mean, DBT just had a unit test part of their
Yeah.
test framework. And just the popularity of DBT is amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So I think it's all kind of going in the right direction.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is for sure. Like you say, 15 years ago, it's let's not go back there. But well, cool. Yeah, thanks, Chris, for the I think the really fun chat. You're very wise. And I think you're yeah, I'm excited to see over the next 5, 10 years where data ops is. I think it feels like it's just at the beginning. So we'll see how it goes.
I think so. I think there's an opportunity like
Big one.
for data engineers. Like I was surprised at how many people went to our data quality testing section
Mm,
and like breaking it out. And I think that really is a big, I think the data quality people are a little bit underserved as well. And so um I think testing is the art of testing.
yeah,
It's hard in software and it's also hard in data.
it's real hard.
And so I think that's also an area where I could see things growing.
Well, cool. For people who want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Just Google Data Kitchen or Google DataOps, or either one. We're at the top.
Cool. All right.
So datakitchen.io.
Kitchen.io. I'll make a note of that. Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris. Fun to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks again, Joe. Hopefully this worked out good.
Yeah.
The